Hello everyone, it's Rob here. Listen, it's YouTube. You know what to do. Hit the bell and the thumbs up, right? Okay, I'll talk to you later. Okay, so here's what I wanted to go over. I wanted to take a look at some of what Biden announced yesterday about their climate agenda. I want to take a look at Canada's response, what we were talking about yesterday, and I want to watch this video about the Red New Deal and centering land back and Indigenous land rights in our climate movement. It was really nice when 80K of us wandered around downtown Vancouver in support of climate action a couple years ago. Yeah, rad-eyed. Like the climate march in Montreal was really cool. I went with my kid. It was really cool. It was really fun and positive. And it's just weird how none of that activism has really led to our government really meaningfully conceding anything. Like our government, who talks about climate action here in Canada, have doubled and tripled down on fossil fuels and fossil fuel extraction and these big fossil fuel giants. And literally, you have Joe Biden, who's probably I think America's our number one purchaser of these products, and they're announcing a huge 50% reduction in what their emissions are going to be. So who do we think is going to be buying this shit?
President.
Not just within the next 5-10 years, but 20, 30, 40 years from now. There's no market for it. There's going to be no fucking market for it anymore. And we're still doubling and tripling down on ensuring that this stuff is extracted from the ground as efficiently as possible. It's very weird. Let's see this climate summit thing.
President Biden has opened a major global climate summit, the first in several years, with a call to world leaders to step up to the challenge. Joe Biden pledged to cut US emissions by at least half from 2005 levels by the end of this decade. But he warned his country couldn't take action alone. He told world leaders that scientists were calling this the decisive decade for tackling climate change, and action was needed now. The latest data shows China is the world's biggest emitter of carbon dioxide, estimated at 28% in 2019. The US was second at 15%, and India was third at 7%.
I think these are always kind of misleading too. These things about China's the number one emitter. I think if you look at cumulative carbon emissions, the United States is so much far ahead of China and India and these other developing countries that it's when you frame it in terms of this modern context, it does kind of give us distorted idea of who has done what and who's responsible for this and who isn't. We've also talked about, I don't want to turn into Mr. China defender here or anything like that. We've also talked about, though, how China's been pretty open and honest about the fact that they're going to continue to burn carbon until getting to this specific date. Which to me is not ideal, obviously, but it's what we're doing in terms of Canada is lying about our emissions and the fact that we're going to stop putting out these carbon emissions any day now, and then we don't do it. Whereas at least their approach is maybe a little bit more honest about what their intentions are and what they're planning on doing. That is a big part of it. The fact that a lot of the carbon emissions that they're doing are in the process of creating products that we then purchase here for cheap. So in a way, part of that is us offloading our carbon emissions to these other countries. There's also a big thing with China and India and these other developing countries where we've literally exported our way of life, our economic ideas to these developing nations and being you have to do things this way. And exporting our main industries to these countries so we can get cheaper labor. And then afterwards criticizing them for contributing to this carbon emissions problem. China also has 5 times the population, so per capita it's the US with a fucking bullet. Yeah, that's a good point. Per capita. So it's per capita emissions, and it's the fact that cumulative since the 1700s or 1800s versus just the last couple of decades. So that's why when they frame this like this, I think it's a little bit misleading on a number of levels.
Our science editor, David Shukman, has this report.
The more the world heats up, the more dangerous it becomes. That's what this is all about. More intense flooding in the UK and many parts of the world is more likely. While in some regions, like Central America, the big fear is droughts getting even worse. Failed harvests are already forcing thousands to leave their homes.
All of a sudden, we can see the whole sphere.
It's one reason why, with a video, President Biden is making climate a priority.
We know just how critically important that is, because scientists tell us that this is the decisive decade. This is the decade we must make decisions that will avoid the worst consequences of the climate crisis.
Theo Dillon, you have the take
saw
there.
The leaders of the world's biggest economies and some of its most vulnerable nations all calling for action on climate change. We're suddenly getting a flurry of promises, counted in different ways but all significant. The United States to cut its emissions by up to 52% by 2030, the European Union 55% by the same year, and the...
That's a good point. This is now the decade because, yeah, we knew about this in the fucking 70s, but we've just punted up to now, leaving it up to this current generation to somehow complete some kind of Hail Mary pass to change our entire now way of life. Before we can do this. And yeah, Danarchist, that's correct as well. We are past the tipping point and only mitigating how bad the climate catastrophe will be. Yeah, that's true. This is the decisive decade, so we'll try to do a 50% reduction by 2030. Yeah. So I want to get into like the legacy of broken promises on this, but let's look at what some of these targets are that are coming out of this climate summit, and then we'll talk about it after. Okay? Here we go.
The UK 78% by 2035. China, the world's biggest polluter, says its emissions will fall from 2030, but President Xi wants more developed nations to cut first.
Developed countries need to increase climate ambition and action, and make concrete efforts to help developing countries accelerate the transition to green and low-carbon development.
To make any real difference, every country has to play its part, and despite all
Not
the
wrong.
talking in recent decades, the scale of the challenge has got even bigger.
Yes,
That's
it has.
Because human activity every year emits something like 50 billion tonnes of the gases that are heating up the atmosphere. Now, scientists say that needs to come down by nearly half by 2030 to have any decent chance of keeping a lid on the rise in temperatures. And emissions should then fall to basically zero by 2050. But at the moment, the world is not heading in that direction. So
No, it
what's
is not.
likely to happen? Well,
Canada has actually we've increased. We're one of the only developed nations that have been part of these talks who have actually increased our carbon output.
electric cars are on their way. We're going to see far more of them. Fewer flights may be on the cards because prices may have to go up if there are charges for pollution.
They do have to.
Eating less red meat is another recommendation from government advisors who say it'll save carbon. And heating our homes, not with gas boilers, but with heat pumps or hydrogen, but the details still need to be worked out.
We're working with everybody, from the smallest nations to the biggest emitters, to secure commitments that will keep change to within 1.5 degrees.
Elon Musk is actually trying to solve it by depopulating the Earth with his AI death machines in public car crematorium. Man, we're so not keeping that to 1.5 degrees. I feel like that's just, we should kind of stop pretending that that's that's a possibility, right? Shouldn't we just stop pretending that that's still a possibility? We should probably just start talking about this like this is inevitable, that we're getting to that point, and then coming up with some kind of solution to not let it get worse than that. That's probably how we should be talking about this, right? All I think of is when I think of climate change is in William T. Volman's Apology to Future Generations, when he describes that electricity and running water is oh god, that's fucking grim. Oh my goodness.
But for younger people, this is all too slow. This Earth Day protest was in Indonesia, and American politicians got a similar message from Greta Thunberg.
We, the young people, are the ones who are going to write about you in the history books. We are the ones who get to decide how you will be remembered. So my advice for you is to choose wisely.
already.
Probably going to buy some land in Northern Ontario, live in a cabin, and hope I don't get tornadoed. I mean, that's a comforting thought, too, technomancy. I understand that inclination, definitely. I'm not going to, learn to be, an outdoors, self-sufficient person. I just feel like this is not in the cards for me. I'm never going to be, a cabin person. A cabin person. Maybe I need to figure this out. I probably should. I just don't know if that's in the cards for me, though.
Green technologies are becoming far cheaper, but the transition to a zero-carbon world will need a lot more political will and help for the countries most at risk. And all of that still needs to be negotiated. David Shukman, BBC News.
Our North America editor John Sopel is at the White House for us. So the world's second biggest CO2 polluter, can President Biden do this new target?
Well, Sophie, there's no doubt that the goal he has set himself is ambitious. It marks a distinct break with the Trump presidency, who pulled America out of the climate change agreement, and is much more ambitious even than when Barack Obama signed up to the climate change deal in 2015. So
you do get the impression that Biden is enjoying showing up Obama with all these big promises and this big agenda that's eclipsing Obama's whole strategy. I saw this thing today, but now Biden is the most popular president among young people already for the last couple of decades. Obama's probably just seething over it. He's coping and seething right now. Even if there is any movement towards climate relief, I'm just here waiting for the 2024 Republican president. This is the kind of essential problem we're looking at here, where it's with Biden's climate agenda, right? Let's watch the end of this video. We can get into that.
Those are the optics of it. But it's also going to require a change in American people's behaviour. The gas-guzzling cars that they drive might have to go. The way they heat and cool their homes might have to change. And also,
I'm sure everyone in America is going to really react to that very normally. Once an American president starts saying hey, you have to stop eating red meat and driving your gas-guzzling cars and heating your homes differently, I'm sure the fine, well-adjusted folks of the United States of America are really going to just respond to that by being hey, listen, it's our planet's future at stake. It's our kids and our grandchildren's generation at stake. So yes, I will make these personal sacrifices. Americans are very famous for making these kinds of taking these kinds of decisions, right? You're very known for behaving rationally. That's right. Yeah, Americans literally burning coal in their trucks to spite people. I mean, that's this is what doesn't give me a lot of hope that regardless of what promises are being made right now, that anything actually good is going to happen. I feel like this is all just kind of a marketing campaign that's happening right now.
So industry as well, where coal and oil are consumed in very large quantities. So those are the challenges. But there's also the political challenge of getting this through Congress. Republicans are sceptical, not just about the science, but about signing up to a deal that Russia and India, as we heard, are not making those sort of commitments to bring massive change about, and China too. And so that is the particular optics of it. So if Joe Biden wants to show that he is a leader on the world stage, then box ticked today. If he wants to bring about a 50% reduction in emissions, that box still has a big question mark in it.
There's so many dipshits who will diesel smoke a Prius on the highway is a weird sign of masculinity. And that's kind of what I wanted to get into as well, right? When we talk about America and how you have some folks, even people that are kind of in this sort of leftist or leftist liberal streaming community that talk about America okay, well, America has problems, but at least we're not authoritarian or undemocratic like these other countries. So at least we have that going for us. We've got a free press. In America, you have a free press, whereas in these other countries like China, you don't have a free press. But what good is your free press doing you when you literally have news agencies owned by fossil fuel companies, essentially? You have fossil fuel companies and energy companies funding junk science that gets perpetuated in this like conservative media machine that is again owned by all these private interests, convincing people that not only is climate change not happening, but that any effort to mitigate climate change is some like liberal, effeminate, soy thing that like you have to not only like not believe in, but actively oppose. You have millions of people in the United States who believe this, who believe that not only is climate change not happening, but like when you see someone driving a Prius or doing the bare minimum to like try and help maybe make things slightly less polluted, like using a different kind of straw, they're like, well, now I'm going to purchase 25 straws just to like show you how like effeminate you are. And it's like, well, how do you have a coherent solution to that at that point then? How do you have a coherent solution to climate change when you have an entire multi-billion-dollar industry that's out there convincing people that climate change is not happening, and that any movement towards climate change is some part of some like totalitarian socialist agenda and this shit? How do you begin to put together an actual plan to deal with that? When this is the case, I mean, I don't really see how that's going to work. I need to go get ready for my fishing trip. Okay, affably Trill. Thank you. Thanks for joining us today. You get good at fishing, because you're going to need to post up at the last remaining fresh water source 10-15 years from now, and that's going to be your main source of sustenance from that. So I added a please don't print this email signature to my email. I've done as much as Biden for climate change. And this is the thing, like, I talked about this in the run-up to the election. In Joe Biden's like climate plan, it's not the Green New Deal, and in fact, it's like he literally ran against that, opposing that. But there's some good stuff in there, and they're like, in terms of this agenda that he's setting right now, there's some bold promises in this. The 50% reduction by 2030. I mean, if that happened, that would be good. But this is the issue, though. We've been dealing with this since the early 80s, about the promises, making promises about what we need to do to solve this. And it has never happened. It's always just been complete bullshit. It's always just been a way for us to feel like we can continue the way things are. But oh yeah, we're gonna begin tackling this any day now, any week now, any month, any year, any decade. So it's just I have a hard time, even though you can point to Biden versus Trump and being like, yeah, of course there's a huge difference in their approach to this. Biden like believes that it's happening. First of all, he's taking these steps. He's trying to be a global leader on this. He's making these bold promises. But like, what fucking evidence do we have that any of these bold promises are going to actually lead to anything meaningfully that's going to actually impact this? Especially, how do we even know that Biden's not going to be replaced by some lunatic, Ron DeSantis or Candace Owens or MGT or whoever in 2024 that's just going to undo whatever bold promises you've made or whatever action you've put into place to try and solve this? What guarantee do we have that some lunatic is not going to take over 3 years from now and immediately undo it and start going back in the other direction? And it goes, again, this always comes up, the comparison to China. It always comes up on the street, but it's worth pointing out, it's the same thing with the infrastructure. This is why we can say, even though, a lot of people say, well, China's not a democracy, it's authoritarian. But then we see, when you have this so-called authoritarian government, they're able to unilaterally decide to build this huge amount of infrastructure, all this high-speed rail, and then they just do it. Instead of being like, well, one side being like, hey, we would like to build one high-speed rail project, and then the other side and their allies in the multi-billion-dollar media establishment making that completely impossible, and then you end up having a fucking 15-year debate over when this is possible, and then you end up laying down, we compromised on the high-speed rail thing, and we just added another lane to a bunch of freeways, and we banned plastic straws. That was in our democratic system. That's what we decided on. That's our actual solution. Whereas China is just like, yeah, we're building hundreds of thousands of miles of high-speed rail. We're going to keep emitting carbon until this date, and then we're going to start reducing it. And you can kind of believe that they're going to do that because they have the ability to just like make these targets and go after them. Whereas in the United States, they're making the targets, they're saying the words, they're saying the things that they need to do. But then it's just like you have a political system that's basically designed around nothing ever changing or nothing ever getting better. So I have a hard time getting excited about any of this. Like you can give, I guess you can give Biden credit for making some of these big promises, but like, what does any of this shit mean? How many? Like it's been decades. It's been decades of promises and words, and commitments and summits, and multiple decades of this, and it has resulted in absolutely nothing. It's resulted in the problem just continuing to get worse.
It's not about the threat of climate change poses. It's about the opportunity that addressing climate change provides. It's an opportunity to create millions of good-paying jobs around the world in innovative sectors. Jobs that bring greater quality of life, greater dignity to the people who are performing those jobs.
You can even call it a Green New Deal, even.
For a line worker, electricians, utility workers, line transmission lines, connecting battery storage, and making our electric grid more modern. For automotive workers, building electric cars, trucks, and buses. Skilled workers installing and charging stations to accommodate them throughout our countries. Construction workers, engineers, insulators, upgrading our schools and commercial buildings and constructing new energy-efficient homes.
Biden's clipping
manufacturing work.
Well, and this is a good point, Web Mode. Nothing more American than taking the looming climate collapse as an opportunity to provide jobs. I do understand that that's the only way you can really sell this, right? Because you can, as we were pointing out, you're not going to be able to sell to Americans. We have to reduce our auto use. We have to stop driving cars in many cases. We got to stop eating meat. We got to stop this big industrialized food production system. You're not going to convince Americans of that. It's not going to happen. It will never happen. So I guess in theory, the only way you can really sell this to people is that's the Green New Deal approach, is by selling it as this is actually going to improve our quality of life rather than subtracting from it. So I do kind of understand that approach, but it's funny because even this approach of selling it like this is still coming across as just as divisive as it would be to just ban hamburgers or ban cars or anything like that. Yeah, and Americans can't stop driving cars because the cities and countries is literally impossible to navigate without a car. That is true as well. I don't know what's the solution to that, right? And that's what Pete Buttigieg was talking about, taxing gas, which is just going to make it harder for people in these rural communities and in these working class communities to get around when they need it. And it's offloading the responsibility onto individuals rather than tackling it in any kind of systemic way. And you could, yeah, of course, Red Scary. High-speed rail is the answer to that. That's exactly what is behind China's motivation to build that high-speed rail. But as we've seen in America, it's just not going to happen. You're not going to be able to, as much as it would be a nice idea, it would be a nice idea to increase the rail infrastructure to the point that you're really allowing people to get around a country that has been designed for automobile use. But it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. It's going to take 10, 15, 20 years to build a small rail project that will probably be shitty. Yeah, and people were pointing this out earlier. The gas car tax is what started the Yellow Vest movement in France. And we're just going to see more of that. The more that our political leaders in Canada and the United States or elsewhere offload the responsibility of fighting climate change to individual consumer decisions, and offloading it to the people that are the most vulnerable and the most susceptible to this kind of stuff, the people that rely on cars to get around to their jobs. It's just that approach will never work. That approach is never ever going to work.
Workers building nuclear and carbon capture technologies, solar panels and wind turbines, and people working in the fields that we haven't even conceived of yet, on farms and on factories and in laboratories and universities, but things we haven't even thought of so far. This challenge and these opportunities are going to be met by working people in every nation. And as we transition to a clean energy future.
We choose to keep funding fossil fuel companies because they spend billions of dollars making sure our lives appear easier when we buy their products. So I really got to read this book, don't I? Yeah, carbon capture. We always hear that, but we always hear about carbon capture. Pretty much our leaders have decided that this is like an essential part of their, it's like a central part of their calculations for how much carbon we're going to be putting out. And they're like, we're going to be reduced by this much because of carbon capture. This like fake carbon capture technology, which does not exist. We're pretending that it will exist in a couple of years through like the magic of innovation. Currently, it does not exist though. But we're just like, we're imagining this fake technology that might possibly exist 10 years from now and completely just counting on that to bailing us out. It's a shame too. We could have had a World War II like effort with everyone pulling together for the greater good. Yeah, I mean I think that's the idea that I think a lot of these like political leaders are trying to have. But I feel like America is past the point where you can have that anymore. It's too divided. It's become too divided over the last couple of decades, especially since the advent of like this conservative media machine, which has basically just like carved the population in two even more, and made it basically impossible to have any kind of unified response like that. And unlike World War II, where there's a giant war going on that you can point to going on currently and pointing to like as a genuine threat to your way of life, that people can understand that connection. People that have grown up in this system where we're always focusing on quarter by quarter growth, right? And they don't understand things like this crisis is really going to affect our way of life a few decades from now. That just like doesn't compute in people's minds. So it's like, oh yeah, this big crisis, which is like going to completely change our whole trajectory of the way our society operates. It's a couple decades away, and people can't get through through their minds, you know? It's like, but it's not tomorrow, it's not next week, it's not next month. So they have a hard time like comprehending that. You know, that's what the last couple of decades have been about, is just passing the buck to the next generation. And we're going to continue to pass the buck until the coast is underwater. And then, frankly, even when the coast is underwater, we're probably still going to be, you know, twiddling our thumbs and blaming each other and not doing anything to stop it. And Ethereum, that's a good point too. Just look at COVID-19 and you know how this will turn out under capitalism. That's right. How much are we leaning on some hopeful individual capitalist innovation to solve these problems instead of holistic approach? Well, that's our whole approach, right? That's why we've like sanctified or have attempted to sanctify people like Elon Musk, right? Who's like convinced people. They've convinced people that there are people that are out there trying to help steer us into this better direction, and they're not just like shameless profiteers that are trying to, you know, elevate themselves as part of this kind of branding exercise. Bill Gates is someone else as well. That is like, he's pretending to be the leader on climate change, but really what Bill Gates is demanding is that governments pour billions or trillions of dollars into research and development to create solutions for climate change that can then be like given to the private industries and they can profit off it, right? Howdy, literally just got a Levi's commercial about buying better to buy less and waste less. You know what, Karl, sometimes I think Twitch knows what I'm talking about and like serves ads to people in the community just to like bug me. just to pretty much contradict what I'm saying, essentially. Florida will be taken out by seawater intrusion into the water table before they're swallowed by the sea, so I think Florida is fucked earlier than people think, actually. That's probably true, Red Scary, and what I think, though, is that there is going to be people in Florida, Republicans mainly, but many people, that even as this shit is happening, are still going to be, like, rolling coal to trigger the libs and stuff like that. It's like, I don't know what needs to happen. I mean, I'm talking about how people can't understand these crises that are happening generations from now, but I actually do not have a ton of confidence that they're going to be able to grasp the scale of crisis, even when it's literally happening outside their window. As someone just pointed out a minute ago, you just need to look at the reaction to COVID to understand what that's going to look like. And to realize that it's not going to make as much of an impact as we'd like to believe.
We must ensure that workers who have thrived in yesterday's and today's industries have as bright a tomorrow in the new industries, as well as in the places where they live. in the communities they have built.
And again, Biden's the guy that couldn't even commit to banning
resilience
fracking.
And infrastructure.
So we're going to take him
create
seriously about this
opportunities
shit.
for everyone. That's the heart of my jobs plan that I proposed here in the United States. It's how our nation intends to build an economy that gives everybody a fair shot. As you heard in the last session, it requires investing in innovation. That's why I've asked the Secretary of Energy, my Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm, who you saw earlier, to speed the development of critical technologies to tackle the climate crisis.
But yeah, so we're going to take Biden serious about this. He couldn't even commit to banning fracking, which scientists have repeatedly said is not good. It hasn't been the science hasn't been enough for Joe Biden to actually commit to anything on this. Just think of the innovation that might happen. Yeah, and net zero is the other big thing too. We hear net zero a lot from our leaders in Canada and the United States about our climate targets. Net zero, which as we know is another code word for basically offloading our carbon emissions elsewhere. More like nut zero. That's right.
To meet this moment.
Land back, Karl. We're gonna talk about land back after this.
Impactful breakthroughs at home and around the world, and lower the cost of we're paying now for polluting the air so badly. We're going to move to net zero and a transition in all countries. And look, every country will need to invest in new clean energy technologies.
Net zero. There we go.
Forward. And
that's the climate bullshit bingo card.
I'm also very proud to announce that the United States is again becoming a key leader
innovation.
in innovation. Helped launch the program during the Obama-Biden.
Jesus Christ. This stuff is beyond parody. It's literally as I'm saying it, he's saying it too. Innovation, net zero, carbon capture, electric vehicles. What else? These are on the climate bullshit bingo cards.
Administration, a pact between the world's largest economies to ramp up investments in clean energy research and development. And today, America is once again stepping into the leadership role. We will be joining in a partner for the nations in efforts to decarbonize critical sectors across the board, including industrial sector, where we'll join with Sweden and India in leadership in the leadership group for industry transition. The power sector, where we'll work alongside of the United Kingdom to spread progress and speed it up toward a carbon-free power system, both here and around the world. And in agriculture, the agricultural sector, where we'll launch the Agriculture Innovation Mission for Climate with the United Arab Emirates and other partners.
That stutter's coming back.
I'm very heartened by President Putin's call yesterday for the world to collaborate and advance carbon dioxide removal. And the United States looks forward to working with Russia and other countries in that endeavor. It has great promise. This is a moment for all of us to build better economies for our children, our grandchildren, and all of us to thrive in not just now, but beyond for the next generations. Nations that work together.
He tried to ad-lib there and it didn't go very well.
Will reap rewards for their citizens. The United States is committed. We are committed to making those investments to grow our economy here at home while connecting with markets around the world. For example, we're launching a new global partnership for climate-smart infrastructure. This will create good-paying jobs here in America by supporting development of new clean infrastructure in our partner countries. These are the sort of partnerships that are going to be good for all of us. And I think they'll have additional benefits just us working together. And today, I'm excited to welcome my counterparts in Spain, Nigeria, Vietnam, and Poland to share their thinking on how to realize the economic opportunities of the climate response. And we're going to be joined by labor and business community leaders from around the world to talk about what's happening in their communities around climate-related jobs. And I'm pleased to be joined by Secretary Buttigieg, Ambassador Tai, and National Climate Advisor Gina McCarthy, the chair of my National Climate Task Force. I look forward to our conversation and making more progress throughout the day. Thank you.
I think you can look at Joe Biden or the Democratic Party versus Trump or versus the Republican Party or the conservative movement and say, like, yeah, of course this is better. There's some ambitious promises in this climate agenda that Biden's setting down there, which is, in theory, this is good. But this is who said this a minute ago? Braided Jade. I'm old and weary of these platitudes. And this is what it's all about. If this stuff was, able to be implemented, if Biden was saying, we're going to cut carbon emissions by 50% by 2030, and we were able to say for ourselves, well, that's something that's going to happen. The idea of U.S. cutting its carbon emissions by 50% by 2030 is great. It's a wonderful idea. If this happens, this would be a great thing. The question is, will this happen? And the answer, I think we know, is no, it will not. There's a number of, as we've been pointing out, there's a number of factors baked into the American political system that make this kind of profound change that he's proposing a complete impossibility. So it's not that it's not a nice idea, but I don't have a ton of confidence that any of this stuff that he's promising or proposing is going to be implemented in any meaningful way. And let's hear from Justin Trudeau, again, announces new carbon reduction targets at International Climate Summit. And this country, Canada, is the absolute masterclass of claiming that we're going to hold ourselves to this standard of carbon emissions and then literally doing the opposite. We've been doing this for 30 years now. So we're going to hear from Trudeau now about our new carbon reduction targets, which I have zero confidence will be met in any way.
When Canadians elected us 5 years ago,
decided not to wear black. He's actually doing blackface under his suit. He's doing it's the body blackface. He's doing it under his suit. It helps him feel comfortable.
Our emissions were projected to keep rising through 2030. But with
yes,
hard
they
work
are.
and a solid plan, Canada is now on track to blow past our old target of 30% reduction below 2005 levels.
Below 2005 levels is an interesting caveat as well, since 2005 levels are still significantly above what we promised when we signed all these original climate targets.
And our climate plan to reduce more emissions, including with a world-leading price on pollution. This
carbon
week,
tax.
We made additional
complete
investments
bullshit
in the budget, and today Canada is in a position to raise our climate ambition once again. Our new climate target for 2030 is to reduce our 2005 emission levels.
Look how proud of himself he is.
To 45%.
Look at that. He's so proud of himself about our targets. This is our new emissions. Listen to this. Our previous emissions targets were here. Well, guess what? Guess what, buddy? Now our new emissions targets, oh yeah, they're up here. So you're going to be all these people that thought I was bad for the environment, well, it's going to be egg on your face. Now, the previous bullshit promise was here, and now I'm promising even more bullshit. It's I can do that. Listen, what are you saying, 45%?
5 emission levels by 40 to 40.
So our new climate target for 2030 is to reduce our 2005 emission levels by 40 to 45%. You want to play this game? You want to play this game, Justin? Guess what? I'm announcing right here on this show that our new climate target for 2030 is to reduce our 2005 emission levels by 55%. What do you think about that, Justin? Guess what? Both of these statements are equally as attainable. They're equally meaningful. There's an equal chance of both my targets that I'm setting here and Justin's targets are going to be met. Oh, Danarchist is saying 75%. Karl is saying 150%. This is crazy. I'm going to keep my poison pill thoughts to myself. Thank you. We're trying to keep this a positive space, Braided Jade. But this is my point. It's equally valid. We can say whatever we want. It's the same. It has the same chance of happening. My targets that I'm putting out right here, and what Justin's targets are saying, and what Danarchist is saying, and Karl and everyone in the chat. It's all there's as much of a chance that any of these targets are going to be hit as what Justin Trudeau is saying right here.
45%.
Look how happy he is with this.
We will continually strengthen our plan and take even more actions on our journey to net zero by 2050.
Net zero.
Seules les politiques climatiques sérieuses donnent des résultats.
Only bold climate policies lead to bold results. For example, you can no longer pollute in Canada for free. In
bold climate
our carbon price will reach $170 per ton.
Look how happy he is. The carbon pricing, again, this is not a solution. This is not a solution. Carbon pricing. He's so satisfied about this. We're literally betting the future of this industry on the fact that people are still going to be needing to purchase fossil fuels from Canada like 3 decades from now.
Climate ambition and economic ambition go together. That's why we're investing in public transit, clean energy, retrofitting homes, and decarbonizing industry like steel, cement, and aluminum to secure our clean industrial advantage. We're also banning harmful single-use plastics, protecting 30% of our oceans and land, and planting 2 billion trees.
So he's been talking about these trees for a while too. The 2 billion trees. You want to know how many? You want to know how many trees we've planted of these 2 billion trees? None. So far, we're going to get to this any day now. We're going to get to the 2 billion trees any day now. I know he's been in power for 5 years. Eventually, we're going to get to this, though. Eventually, we're going to do this. Like, we're going to talk about hitting climate targets. We can't even hit our goddamn tree planting targets. And we're going to pretend that we're going to reduce our carbon emissions by 45% within the next decade. Justin, I don't know about this. I don't know if I believe this.
And we will make it law to respect our new 2030 target and achieve net zero emissions by 2050.
Ding, ding, ding.
That's our local story. And it could be part of a global success story too. In Canada, we've worked hard to get to over 80% emissions-free electricity, and we're not going to stop until we get to 100%. If major economies in the room were to follow Canada's lead and adopt a rising price on pollution and commit to phase out coal plants, we would accelerate our global path for a safe, prosperous net zero future.
Yeah, and then, look at this. I just paused it on this screen, kind of accidentally, but gives the game away right there, isn't it? Climate ambition and economic ambition go together. They're still selling this idea that we can have that quarter by quarter growth. We can have our cake and eat it too. We can have that quarter by quarter economic growth, and we can reduce our climate targets. We can do both of these things. Do we still really believe this? Does anyone believe this? Does anyone believe this? Neoliberal.jpg, thank you. Like, it couldn't be, you couldn't sum it up more than this, with this one image, right? Complete bullshit. And I mean, look at the whole carbon tax thing and the way that, like, that's supposed to be a climate policy that appeals to conservatives. Because it's like, that's the whole point of proposing something like carbon taxes, is that it's like, oh, it's this market-based system. We're going to appeal to conservatives by, like, having these market-based incentives about pollution. Has that appealed to conservatives? It's been 5 years of this messaging, and conservatives have framed carbon pricing as, like, the communist takeover agenda of Justin Trudeau, who hates the oil and gas industry. Right? That's how many conservatives they've brought on board with this, like, neoliberal market-based approach to reducing carbon emissions. They've turned carbon taxes, this, like, pathetic excuse for actual climate action that's meant to appeal to conservatives and, like, capitalists. They've been doing this approach for 5 years, and they've turned that into, like, a radicalizing thing on the right that has, like, turned the right against, like, completely against this idea of doing anything like this. Alright, that's the end of the video, everyone. Thank you for watching it. If you haven't already, hit the thumbs up, hit the bell, leave a comment or whatever, or don't, and I'll talk to you soon, okay? Alright, bye.